This guy's literally trying to start an adpocalypse because someone was mean to him. Now we're all going to lose money just because he doesn't like you.
Get in line. I'm really glad to have our next guest. You can follow him on the Twitter at Timcast. He's a journalist, YouTuber, podcaster. His YouTube is youtube.com/Timcast. And he also has Timcast News. Yep. Senor Tim, Mr. Tim Pool. How are you, sir? Thank you for being here. Pretty
good. Yeah, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you. And I appreciate that Tim Pool level of enthusiasm as to how, well, you're pretty good. I'm okay.
Yeah. I've been called a milquetoast fence sitter.
Okay. So, I guess I think milquetoast fence sitter is redundant. I don't really know that you need to repeat that. I don't think you're a milquetoast fence sitter. I just think you're very mellow. This obviously has been going on this week. A campaign initiated by NBC, Vox, Carlos Maza. I don't know just the guy who does the videos at Vox. An active effort to get our channel deplatformed, even tweeting that people should go mass flag our videos. Let me ask you, you've talked about sort of with Twitter, I remember on Joe Rogan's show, and it was great. I highly recommend people go check out that show. Yeah. You've talked about this, and we appreciate the support that you've given this channel in regards to this controversy. How common is this sort of flagging, banning campaign, or really, what would you say is, if people need to understand the dynamics of what's going on right now, because it's easy to feel like you're drinking from a fire hose when it comes to sort of corporate censorship, silencing. What would you really want to drill into people?
There's a very, very simple fact you can tell people to prove 100% the social media platforms are biased against conservatives. And it's their misgendering policy. Progressives progressives don't represent the entirety of the left, according to the Hidden Tribes report by a group, I believe it's called a group called More in Common. Progressive activists in the US are 8% of the country. It's these people primarily who view the misgendering thing the way Twitter does, that if someone decides to have a preferred pronoun, you have to use it, otherwise you can be banned. Conservatives tend to disagree, the majority, I would say. I mean, Ben Shapiro is much, much opposed to way more than just the idea of misgendering, but, in terms of the trans debate, trans women competing in sports.
He almost got headlocked by an angry transgender for doing that. Yeah.
Was that on that show where they?
Dr. Drew with Zoe Tour, who threatened to put him home in an ambulance. Horrible experience. It plays no role in political discourse, but wildly entertaining. Yeah.
So just look at the rules, and I told this to Jack Dorsey, full stop. You are biased against conservatives, and he didn't understand this. I said, listen, if a conservative doesn't believe you're, in misgendering the way you do, you have an ideological difference where you're enforcing rules based on your personal ideology. He went on to say, well, we have studies we've read that show the suicide rate is higher, therefore we're trying to protect them. And I asked, what about, general body dysmorphia? At what point do you draw a line and say this group should or shouldn't be protected?
Right.
Can you not make fun of depression because people who are depressed have the highest rate of suicide? That's literally, particularly.
Actually, it's not higher than transgenders. That's actually something that's.
Oh, it's not?
No, it's not. It's actually not.
Oh, wow.
There's no other demographic that I know to be as high outside of, from what I understand, like paranoid schizophrenics. Even Ben Shapiro's made this point. American slaves didn't have nearly as high of an attempted suicide rate. If I'm not mistaken, it's about 42%. 41. Both pre and post-op, by the way. So this idea that it's societally sort of based oppression, it just doesn't bear out. But yeah, it's actually a higher rate than those who would be considered like even manic depressive.
I would say that's the easiest thing you can say, right? It's not a debate. You point that out and people are going to go, oh, I guess you're right. Now, the people on the left, the progressives say, so what you're saying is that conservatives are mad they can't misgender people. And it's like, well, hold on. They view misgendered in an inverse way. They believe that if someone is biologically male and you say she, you have misgendered them, right? So it's literally just, I don't know how you rectify that. There's two different ideologies here, and it's only enforced in one direction.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, that is a great point. And also this idea of, I think you see it sort of to get back to this NBC Vox thing. Let me ask you this. Have you ever seen people on the right, or people like, I know that I've never done this, but how common is it to see people on the right to encourage mass flagging and removals of points of view they disagree with? I'm not familiar with it.
Happens, but it's extremely, extremely rare, right? And so, this is another thing that puts me kind of more on your side in an issue like this. I get people tweeting at me saying, oh, here comes Tim to defend the conservative. I'm like, well, Steven Crowder isn't calling for someone to have their career destroyed simply because they said something mean on the internet.
Right.
In fact, you've actually told people not to dox, not to harass. So it's kind of like, you can't have Carlos Maza advocating for throwing milkshakes at people to humiliate them and then complaining about someone saying mean words that humiliates him.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah,
fairness.
One is by the way, throwing a milkshake at someone is actually assault.
Yeah,
that
legally.
it is legally assault. Yeah, actually, you're right. It's further than assault. It's actually battery. Yeah. And people who say, well, milkshakes haven't really hurt you. Actually, that's not true. People can put anything in a milkshake. First off, people can hide something heavy in there and whip it at you. People can put acid in there. And I've always said, I've always condemned doxing because I was doxed at one point. I am actually on the ISIS kill list. It's not people saying
correct.
mean things. I've been in communication with the FBI. Yeah. Not only that, there's so many people on the FBI kill list. When I spoke with people at the FBI, they're like, almost everyone makes that list. Like, but there is an ultra premium list, sort of the elite flyers club. They're like, and you're at the top of that.
VIP
So
list.
here's our number. I've always actively discouraged it. I never want any physical violence. That was another thing Jack Dorsey spoke with you about, physical safety. Whether it's doxing, whether it's milkshaking. But this idea that mass flagging and reporting something to get it removed, it really is... Yeah.
I got one better for you.
Okay.
There's a body of journalistic ethics from this the Society for Professional Journalists. If you go to J school, you probably know this, but apparently these people who work at Vox don't. It's called minimize harm. Mm-hmm. When you seek to do a story, if revealing information about your subject would cause them harm, you do your best to avoid that. Which means, if I heard that a group of people who were very, very awful and dangerous were using a certain company, I would reach out to the company without naming them, because it's not my position as a journalist to cause harm to them or anyone, more importantly, to interfere in the story and make the story, change the story as a result of my actions. Okay. When a journalist goes down to cover something on the ground, you should not be putting your body in the way to change what happens. You're trying to tell people what happens, not cause the reaction.
Right.
However, what happens now is, I actually have evidence of this. I received some leaked documents. We'll see if I can do anything with it. Journalists use very fanciful language targeting businesses and companies to cause maximum harm to specific individuals. So they're not seeking to, when they report on, say, the Proud Boys, they're not seeking to inform the audience as to what's going on. They're seeking to inflict damage on the business and the Proud Boys. What they'll do is they'll say something like this. Let's say you're a laundromat. They see a Proud Boy go inside the laundromat. They wait till the person leaves. They'll go inside, go up to the manager and say, the Proud Boys are white supremacists. Why do you support white supremacists? And then the manager goes, well, what are you talking about? Of course I don't. Well, of course you do. And so they'll send a message to a company saying, why do you support X? Mm-hmm. Instead of asking them if they do, they assume it is true. And then, man, I have seen these hit pieces go flying. But the best part is, they don't. So I'll give you an example. CNN, for instance, reached out to Facebook about a group called Mafic Media. Mafic Media is anti-war left-wing content aimed at millennials. And they're, I believe, 51% owned by Ruptly, which is funded by Russia Today. CNN reaches out to Facebook and says, why are you
Is that those big ladies who do the... That's BuzzFeed Boldly.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry, I apologize.
Yeah, no. Mafic is very much like no intervention in Syria, things like that, know. So, but CNN reached out to Facebook, and I don't know exactly what they asked, but in my personal opinion, I imagine it was something like, why is Facebook supporting Russian propaganda? Because what ends up happening is Facebook then suspended the media company who broke no rules. And it wasn't until after the suspension does CNN publish the story, Mafic Media suspended by Facebook because they're owned by Russia, blah, blah, blah. That's not what journalism is supposed to be doing. So you actually have left-wing activists who have gotten jobs because it's lucrative for the companies, and they're not trying to learn, they're trying to impact.
Right.
You look at Jim Acosta. He straight up says he grandstands. That's the point.
Right.
So they're trying.
Well, he says that now, and that's the thing. For the longest time, he tried to feign that he was objective. And I've always said this idea that there's this death of objective journalism. If you go back to Walter Cronkite and actually read what he's written and see what his quotes were, he said, I don't think you can be a journalist and not be a liberal. For a long time, we thought he was, my God, an actual journalist. People are inherently biased. I don't believe in any golden era of unbiased journalism. I just think that now it's more clear. And to me, that's somewhat a good thing, because at least we know where the lines are drawn. I wish it weren't so polarized, but it is. And that's a very interesting point that you bring up there. There's also been a real transition, because you talk about it being financially viable with Vox and this Carlos Maza, where now they've shifted from myself, Vox, to the targeting of advertisers on YouTube. And a lot of other YouTubers, people who would not support me at all politically, are pretty upset by this. I think that's where they may have screwed the pooch. Have you been following this, and is this kind of a common tactic?
Yes. So the video I have earlier today kind of talks about how Carlos Maza, in his interview with AM2DM, I think it's called, on BuzzFeed, he said he gets to the point where he talks about how, you're harassing me, all that stuff, but then says, it's not you. It's that YouTube is distracting the advertisers from the fact that they can't control their platform and their advertisements appear on, hateful, bigoted, homophobic content, et cetera, et cetera. And I saw a tweet from Keemstar, who does Drama Alert on YouTube. It's like YouTube culture stuff. And he said, this guy's literally trying to start an adpocalypse because someone was mean to him. Now we're all going to lose money just because he doesn't like you.
Yeah.
So this is what I find
Get
interesting.
in line.
Look, digital media has been hurting, right? Vice, literally right now, I just pulled up a story. Vice just fired 2 of its longtime editors, someone who's been with the company for 10 years. They've had layoffs. CNN just laid off their London staff. CNN just put their contractors on a net 90. Yeah. That means if you work for them, they won't pay you for 3 months. That's financing your staff. That's crazy.
Right.
So a lot of these companies are hurting. All of a sudden, very conveniently, a story came out from Vox, not a couple weeks ago, where they acknowledge their evaluation is probably down from their initial investment. We just saw a story where Vox is now switching to freelancers and part-timers, which to many is indicative of them hurting. I don't want to accuse Vox of failing or anything like that. But then all of a sudden, Carlos Maza comes out. You've criticized him before, but it's now. It's now that, and then he advances his argument to talk about advertisers instead of you, and he's using his identity to target the platform as a whole, accusing it of being an alt-right haven. I find it fascinating that he's playing the victim here, that he's the little guy being oppressed when he actually is one of the most prominent figures on a channel with 40%
well, and
more.
Keep in mind too, this is also one thing you talked about. Like we have close to 4 million, they have close to 6 million. But the very first Vox rebuttal that we've done, which by the way include on average I think about 8 to 12 times the sources that are publicly listed that Vox never does than they do. We might have had less than 500,000 subscribers. So it's not like we were punching down. We were going after the biggest channel because we're going, hold on a second, they support the Australian gun buyback. We're going to rebut that. And again, hours and hours of content. People need to know a tossed in aside of lispy gay Latino from Vox. If people want to watch the videos in their entirety, listen, we can have the conversation that conservatives shouldn't be allowed to do comedy. I didn't call him a holster. I didn't call him a feckless. I think it was positively tame. That's just my opinion. But it's there's no doubt that there's a substantial rebuttal to the arguments made over there at Vox. And by the way, we've done it with Vox when it wasn't this guy. We did it when it was that Ezra Klein guy and Vice. It's about 1% of our content. So that's what bothers me is the dishonesty in people taking something that's been going on for a long time when we were a channel that was very small and actually really punching back at the bully.
Right. So here's the way I kind of see it. When it comes to political discourse, I discourage mockery, name calling, whatever. However, I recognize you're a comedian. You're not a journalist. When Tucker Carlson called Brian Stelter a eunuch, I pushed back on that in several videos. Like, I do not think that's appropriate. In your instance, you're right. Feckless pollster and things like that have been done. We've seen way more egregious stuff on the left, but it's not about a tit for tat. It's kind of Jon Stewart, Trevor Noah, John Oliver. They routinely mock and target people at or above their level. Sure. And Carlos Maza gets 1 million views per video. He's not some random nobody small guy being punched down. Yeah. You're a guy who's mocking him and doing a comedy bit. If he was a private citizen and he posted a video of Nancy Pelosi, I'd have some criticism for you, but he's not.
Right.
He's I would argue he's extremely powerful with nearly 100,000 subscribers, 1 million views per video, having access to 6 million subs in a company that's funded to the tune of $200 million by NBC. It's my understanding.
Yeah, that's just the NBC Universal investment. Yeah, that doesn't include any of the other investors, which is why I wonder, how did you lose all this money? Where did it go? I mean, 200 million. What? How many strike throughs are you guys doing? We only see one every 2 weeks. Yeah. It is really remarkable. I think also people hopefully know, when we do a change my mind, or even if you look at the leftists who we've had in this show, I've had conversations with or debated, and it's gotten heated, from Naomi Wolf to Sally Cohn to Christopher Titus to the guy from Think Progress, the guy from Slate or Salon. I've never insulted them. There's a difference when you're doing a bit and you're talking with someone, and I've always tried to delineate, because the last thing I would ever want is to pick on someone and be rude to them in person when they've done me the courtesy of appearing on the program.
I feel like I've made several videos. So my second channel, which is the Timcast News one, where I regularly talk about fairness and rights. I made a video recently, "You have no rights, the world is cruel and unfair." And I talked about the woman in Hawaii who fell 20 feet, broke her leg, and had to drag herself to the stream and eat moths and drink dirty water to survive. I'd like to ask many of the progressives, where was her right to health care? Is there anyone who's, well, she certainly had a right to speech, defense, freedom of movement, etc. So probably why I'm not, overtly liberal or progressive is because I'm not 100% on board with saying healthcare is a human right.
Mm-hmm.
Then the other story was Mount Everest, where you had all this crowding. And I ask, when in one of the stories they said people were collapsing because they ran out of oxygen. Do you think any of those people said, here, take mine? Of course not. Right. Because when it came down to the harsh realities of the world, people had to secure their own face mask before securing the mask of the people next to them. So I see someone like Carlos Maza who calls for physical attacks on people. It's a milkshake. I think it's really low level, but still, you're saying make physical contact with another person in violation of their autonomy. That's an egregious violation. But then he gets mad that someone said mean words to him. And so here's where I end up. Do I think we get anywhere with mockery and insults? Of course not. I think it's detrimental. However, people call me things all day, every day, and I'm an adult. I'm not really bothered. You can call me literally whatever you want. I opened the segment by saying I'm a milquetoast fence sitter, and I think it's funny.
And I would actually like to do a web extended here, but so before we go to the web extended, let's go back to this kind of trend of big journalism, big tech on a national level. Let me ask you this. Do you think that this trend is going to reverse? Do you think there's hope for people who are sort of free speech advocates on places like YouTube and social media, or do you just see these places kind of eating themselves alive?
I kind of go back and forth on this when it's tough. I will say with the EFF coming out now saying we have to deal with this, that's really good news. I also think regulation is coming, and regulation can only ratchet in one direction as it pertains to free speech. I don't know if wider regulation of Facebook, Google, Twitter, et cetera, would result in something positive. What I do know is, as far as it goes with free speech, any regulation implemented in terms of speech will guarantee the right to speech. So we've already seen the Supreme Court rule that these digital spaces, the government cannot restrict your access to them. Now we've seen with that Trump lawsuit, public officials can't block you, and this is now biting Ocasio-Cortez.
But Tlaib has me blocked right now.
Yeah,
she can't. That's illegal. You can file a suit. You can. The Knight First Amendment Foundation. I'm not sure. Knight Foundation's journalism. They're based out of Columbia Journalism School. They tweeted to Ocasio-Cortez she was running afoul of the First Amendment. They deleted the tweet because these people rarely like to police their own, but
right.
They did. Well, actually, I take that back. They sometimes eat their own too much.
Yeah.
But I think that's really good news. I think regulation. Look, here's another point where I'm probably to the left of you. I think regulation will absolutely be a good thing in this regard, and in many other regards. So
no, I don't think so. I've talked about this, and my position has been pretty clear. I think the first step before we get to sweeping legislative overhaul, and this is what I've been advocating for a long time, the first step is to get them basically in a court of law and to declare whether they are publishers or platforms. Put them in the hot seat. And if they say we are platforms, then we say, okay, we're going to regulate you as such. But if they say they're publishers, we say, okay. But then you have to be honest about your business practice. I think it's an easier first step.
Yeah.
But it's actually the platform versus publisher has to do with whether or not they can be sued for libel, and the reason they're able to ban anyone they want is actually a First Amendment issue, and that's where it's complicated, because Twitter is arguing everything on our platform is our speech, and you can't make us speak.
Right.
And they're right. So if the government rules, Twitter has a massive impact on the political space, the news space, and our government. Therefore, free speech for the individual must be protected. Then Twitter opens the doors and allows people back on the platform. I don't necessarily know if it's the right thing to do. I lean towards that direction, but I also recognize you will end up seeing ridiculous trolling going crazy. At the same time, you have the ability to block, and by all means, use it liberally,
Yeah.
So,
but I still think, again, that would at least open the doors to know what the policies are. And like you said, if they want to declare that they are publishers, they should be held liable. In other words, and if right now you are policing speech, if right now you're saying this point of view is allowed, but calling a biological male he is not, it's a bannable offense. Well, if you are now a publisher, it does have to be congruent with the law, and that, okay, you can be held legally responsible for that speech on your publishing platform. Now, if you want to say you're basically a platform, what people often sort of refer to as social utilities, public utilities, which is, they've enjoyed some of those protections. That's why you can't necessarily sue them right now. They do have to pick a lane. And before we say we're going to legislate them as either a publisher or platform, I think having them answer would be a good first, less expensive, less invasive step. And I think they'd have to start straightening up and fly right. Okay, before we go to the web extended here, okay, go ahead. You were about to say something.
I was going to say the bigger problem is cultural. Our business, our private institutions are extremely susceptible and weak to low-grade activism. 30 people on Twitter complaining to a brand, and that brand loses, goes apeshit and shuts everything down. And our businesses need to become more resilient to a bunch of, people on Twitter.
Yeah, well, that also brings me to this last point. We can touch on it, and then we'll continue the Web Extended. You've talked about this sort of trend, too, of targeting. When people talk about bullying, big news media, these corporate conglomerates targeting individuals at a national level. We saw it with the Covington kids. Like you mentioned, did you mention Daily Beast and the guy who created the Nancy Pelosi video? CNN just recently. I mean, this is something, it does seem like that there's been an acceleration recently where they don't seem to mind at all doxing individual people or violation of privacy rights.
Yeah, that's called maximizing harm. It's the complete opposite of ethical journalism. Yashir Ali is a great journalist, and I love when he calls them out for this. He said, publishing this guy's name did nothing for the story. Absolutely nothing. They published his photograph. They published his criminal history. None of that is relevant. They could have talked about how they found the guy and he comes from, working class means. That's interesting. But why should you ruin this guy's life? It's because it's punishment. It's a threat. This is activism. It's maximizing the harm against a private individual who has no chance of fighting against a massive multi-billion-dollar corporation.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a good point. And I think the sort of, equalizing factor there, for example, with us and Vox is, they are this massive corporation with hundreds of millions of dollars. We started out of my den, but having that platform and having a voice is equally or comparably as valuable, and that's why they want to silence the voice. It's leveled the playing field a little bit. All right, we're going to go to a Web Extended. That is, though, youtube.com/Tim Pool. Is it, Timcast, and Timcast News, and you are on Twitter at Timcast. Tim Pool, thank you so much. Hey there, if you like this video, this is the part where I would usually tell you to subscribe, but I can't do it anymore. I'm going to tell you to subscribe, and then YouTube is going to decide that we can't reach you even though you subscribe to this channel, and then I'll say hit the notification bell, and then the notification bell won't even be there anymore. I don't know what to say. More than likely you'll find my face in a milk carton. But do what you can to stop it. It probably won't do much.